It is time for another episode of the Life in the Movies podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts. My name is Ryan Cam. Thank you all so much for tuning in. This week, last week, Jacob and I celebrated some of our favorite musicals. Well, this week we're going to do the opposite side of the coin. Found an article from the Saturday Evening Post talking about the worst movie musicals ever. So there's a lot to unpack with that article. Plus, we'll be covering The Punisher season 1 episode 5. But first, I have to introduce my co-host, Jacob Martin. Jacob, how you doing?
Doing pretty good. It's been a good week. Things have been quite refreshing. I think shifting into the music side of things on my channel, I've been enjoying reviewing some albums lately, but it's also good to still be part of your show as well. So I'm excited to dive into some unfortunate movie musicals that, are not going to be that good compared to last week.
Yeah, well, the reality is, like every genre or subgenre, there are always the dogs, as Siskel and Ebert would always like to say.
Yeah, exactly. And then some of these movies are so bad it makes you appreciate the really, really good ones.
Exactly that. But before we dive into Punisher talk, did you see anything that you wanted to discuss?
Um, as of now, I'm still going through Percy Jackson. I think we're now on, at the time this is recording, we're on episode 7, so there's one episode left before the series finale. Like I said last week, I've been highly enjoying the series so far. Episode 7 is really good. I like how they visualized the underworld and how they did Hades and some of the stuff related to the underworld and Greek mythology. It ended on a frustrating cliffhanger, but it left me all the more excited about the finale, which at the time this drops, I've already watched it. I can't wait to watch it. I think it's going to be a great finale. Hopefully, it'll pay off. And also, I watched for the first time in quite a few years the Disney movie Bolt. This is one I hadn't seen in several years. I think I've only seen it two other times in my life. Once when it first came out, and I watched it when I previously did a Disney project on Letterboxd several years ago. And it's one where the more I've watched it, the more I actually do like this film. It's one of the more forgotten about Disney films from the 2000s. The movie, in a way, is almost inspired by the Truman Show, if you think about it, because it involves a dog named Bolt who spends the rest of his no, he's who spends most of his no, I'm messing up. Who spent his life on a Hollywood set thinking he is a superhero dog. So he thinks he has like the super bark and he has all these powers, these cool powers. But he but unaware that he's just playing a character. So when he thinks that his person, this girl named Penny, has been kidnapped, he tries to go rescue her, but he ends up being, for a series of accidents and conveniences, he ends up on the other side of the country. And along the way, as he's journeying to head back, obviously he starts to realize that he's just a dog, and he learns that there's more to life than just being Bolt the super dog. And I thought this was a sweet film. It's not like I wouldn't say it's a top tier Disney film, but I thought the film was very charming throughout. I enjoyed the characters. I thought Bolt was likable. He teams up with this alley cat named Mittens, who, when they introduce the character, she's kind of like the godfather of cats almost, which was kind of weird. But she becomes more likable as the movie goes along. They have this interesting little dynamic. There's a comic sidekick, this hamster named Rhino, who's like a diehard fan of Bolt the TV show. The film is constantly funny throughout. There's this gag involving these pigeons where in different parts of the country they always come up to Bolt and there's this running gag where they're like, I've seen this dog before. This dog looks very familiar. And there's the New York pigeons where they're trying to figure that out. And there's like on the nose clues about who Bolt the dog is, whether posters or uh, or vehicles that are promoting the show, but they're still very oblivious who this character is supposed to be. I thought that was a funny running gag, and there's a couple wink winks to other Disney and even Pixar movies. Like there's a Finding Nemo joke that I never picked up until this viewing that had me cackling, which cracked me up. Some of the voice cast is interesting because you got John Travolta as Bolt, who I think did a solid job. And then you have the girl Penny, who is voiced by Miley Cyrus. And I would say her casting, I would say, is kind of a mixed bag. A lot of times when watching the movie, her voice sticks out like a sore thumb. Like I do not buy Miley Cyrus voicing a little girl because this was in the middle. I think she was in her Hannah Montana phase, and it really took me out of the movie. But then there's other parts where she does sell some of the heartfelt moments between her character and Bowl, especially this one touching scene near the end, one of the more intense sequences of the movie. So I think I'm more mixed on her performance than anything else, but there's other parts where it's more of a distraction. But yeah, rewatching the film, I think I'm surprised. Nobody talks about this movie. I think it's a little bit underrated. The animation's good. It's funny. It's got heart when it needs to. It doesn't stack compared to some of the best Disney films, but considering when this movie was made, this was kind of a step in the right direction. Uh, the movie that Disney needed to make before they got to the Disney revival era. So I think all around a solid film from Disney.
Yeah, I was actually going to say the only thing that I remember from this movie is that John Travolta voices the dog and that Miley Cyrus voices the little girl. Uh, I was going to say the reason why that was done is probably because, well, they had her under contract as Hannah Montana, so I'm sure that had pretty much everything to do with that decision. I haven't seen the movie in a good long while, so I'll definitely need to rewatch it, but I remember liking it. It's odd. I remember like literally nothing about the movie, although I've heard nothing but good things about it. So it's yeah, it was kind of in that weird nether time of like the Disney Renaissance was long over, Tangled was 4 years away, and so Disney was just in that phase of trying to throw things at the wall to see what was going to stick. And what ended up sticking was Tangled and later Frozen, but that's like 4 and 7 years down the road respectively. So they're just like spinning their wheels. But I think Bolt, from what I remember of it, which is not much, but from what I remember, I do remember liking it.
Yeah, between this and Meet the Robinsons, I think these were the movies Disney needed to make after the disaster that was Chicken Little. Uh, Neither movie, I don't think, are top tier, but they were steps in the right direction to get Disney where they needed to be once we got to movies like Tangled and Frozen and Zootopia, Princess and the Frog, Wreck-It Ralph, all those good movies that came afterward.
Yeah, Chicken Little represented Disney hitting rock bottom. But then after that, they hit the bottom and then they started making their way back up again, at least in that era anyway.
Yeah.
But if you don't have anything, I'll go into a couple that I've been watching lately. The Godzilla and Kong project continues apace with Godzilla versus Gigan and Godzilla versus Megalon. Godzilla versus Megalon is the movie with the drop kick. If you know, you know. And it's it's awesome and it's literally the only thing in the movie that even is like, oh yeah, that was in that movie. The rest of the movie is just kind of nothing really, except for Jet Jaguar, which was a character created by a contest, which was won by an elementary schooler. So an elementary school student created a monster that is now in kaiju lore. You can't make this stuff up. You really can't. And just I don't know. As I sit here at this recording, I have yet to watch Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, which I've heard is one of the best of the Showa era. But I'm just like, this is such an up and down like series of films because you got Godzilla, the original, which is like this big metaphor for the nuclear bomb and just the fallout from that. And then everything like goes up and up and up, and then it peaks with Ghidra the three-headed monster. There's a couple bumps, and then there's destroy all monsters, and then straight down in quality. It's been an interesting few movies. It's none of these movies like are as bad as like All Monsters Attack, which is like I said, a clip show, and that's just not good. But he's like Godzilla versus Hedorah. Godzilla is fighting a literal crap monster. And then he faces Gigan, which is basically a chicken with hook hands and a saw in his stomach. And then you got Megalon, who's just this big mole cricket bug-looking thing with a thing in his head that shoots lightning, and he spits fire bombs. So any semblance of Toho giving a crap in this era just left a long time ago. So it's been an interesting ride, to say the least.
And I thought King Kong shoving a tree down Godzilla's throat was hilarious. It sounds like I'm just scratching the surface.
Brother, you have not seen the half of it.
Godzilla fighting turd. You got that ridiculous looking drop kick. And then you mentioned in one of the videos Godzilla and another monster talking, and you read their speech bubbles.
Yeah, I I legit forgot to bring it up in my Godzilla versus Gigan review because I filmed it at like near midnight and I was so tired. I just straight up forgot about it. And then a Twitter follower was like, I'm struggling to remember why these two talk to each other. I'm like, oh, I forgot to talk about the speech bubbles. So I made sure to bring it up in the Godzilla versus Megalon review. There's so much going on in these movies that you're just like, oh yeah, they did do that thing. That kind of sucked, actually. But
It's like that scene. Have you seen that comedy, The Great Outdoors? Uh,
yes, I
there's this
love that.
bit in that movie where these like forest animals are talking to each other, and we read their subtitles. But
Yes,
that's played for laughs, and it's
yeah,
funny in that movie. I think Godzilla. I think those are supposed to be serious movies almost. They're like adult
borderline, yeah.
film. So yeah, that's not a good idea when you're trying to make a blockbuster film mostly played straight.
So it's pretty odd. And then I saw a new release. Well, technically, this is a new release. It came out in 2023, but it released wide this weekend. Because strangely enough, this weekend we didn't get any new wide releases.
Hmm.
It's weird. But I ended up seeing American Fiction, which was the directorial debut of Cord Jefferson, starred Jeffrey Wright, Sterling K. Brown, Leslie Uggams, and among others, and Issa Rae. It tells the story of a man who is an author and a college professor. He writes these books like he's a black author, but he doesn't really write black books. And it takes place in our time where it's like these stories from like marginalized voices are like the priority, which on paper is a very good idea, but they're looking for a specific kind of story. And so, as a bit of a joke, he writes a book called My Pathology, but he spells it Pathology, My Pathology. It's written by under a pseudonym as Stag R. Lee, and it's basically like an extreme version of the movie like Boys in the Hood. It's very like stereotypical, like every black stereotype that you could think of. He writes it as a joke and it becomes a monster hit. Like he gets $4 million for the movie rights. There's even a bit of a side joke where Michael B. Jordan is set to play the main character in the movie version of it. And as Stag R. Lee's career soars, his personal life kind of falls apart because his mom has dementia and his brother comes out as gay and he's having to deal with that. The movie is surprisingly really good. Or not surprisingly, it is really good. I was expecting good things and it was more complex than I was expecting. I was thinking, "Oh, this is just going to be a satire. We need a lot of those lately." But it's more than just a satire. The satire is good, but it also takes its time being a good story too, with a lot of heart. So I don't know if it's playing in your area or if any of you are watching this in your area. I do recommend that you check it out though. It's very good.
Yeah, the only thing I knew about this movie was some of the awards buzz it was getting.
Hmm.
So I'm glad you really enjoyed the film.
Yeah, and then to close things out, I watched a couple of found footage horror movies because I've been trying to broaden my horror knowledge, and I've connected with a guy who's been on this channel before, John Marr from the Why We Love Horror Trivia League. He runs it, and he gave me some found footage horror movies to watch. So I watched Unfriended and I watched VHS 2. I've seen the original VHS. VHS 2 is a freaky little movie. It's basically an anthology of like five stories directed by different directors. And one of the segments in VHS 2 is directed by a man named Eduardo Sanchez. If that name does not sound super familiar, he is one of the directors behind a little movie called The Blair Witch Project. He and his co-director directed that, and he directs a segment here solo by himself. Also, one of the directors is Gareth Evans, who has had a pretty long career. He directed The Raid and The Raid 2, so that was a nice get for them. And like I said, this movie's not for everyone. Like especially in the content department. There's a segment called Safe Haven, which will just leave you speechless. It is a freaky little segment. But if you have the stomach for it, I do recommend it. I recommend that one highly.
All right.
Yeah, Safe Haven is about a cult, and it ends pretty badly for the cult, let's just say. Like if you have any knowledge of, say, things like Heaven's Gate or Waco, the cult goes the way of those.
All right. How's the 1999 project going?
It's been going rather interestingly. As of this recording, I had to pause watching Payback, which is a Mel Gibson movie, and I'm liking it so far. I've heard really good things, but I'm thinking it's just okay. The reviews this week will be The Payback and Simply Irresistible, which stars Sarah Michelle Gellar and Sean Patrick Flannery. And I've heard mixed things on Simply Irresistible, but I haven't watched it yet.
All right. Well, yeah, keep going along on that series because that's those have been some fun videos that you've done so far.
Yeah, I'm getting into the month of February 99, and some of the ones that I have to cover, including like those two, like I mentioned, but I got Blast from the Past, which starred Brendan Fraser as a man who basically lives with his parents in a bunker that is like set in the 1950s, and he finally like breaks free of it. And Christopher Walken is his dad, and like it's just I feel like that's gonna be good. And then there's Message in a Bottle, which is based on a Nicholas Sparks book starring Kevin Costner. And then there's My Favorite Martian, which is a Disney movie. Jacob, have you heard of My Favorite Martian?
I've actually seen My Favorite Martian. I covered that on Celebrating Disney in 2023. It stars Jeff Daniels and Christopher Lloyd, and it is an adaptation of a 1960s sitcom. It doesn't have good reviews. I thought the film was dumb, but it was dumb in a way that I mildly enjoyed it. I was in the minority and didn't mind that movie.
And then next, I'm going to be covering a Spanish film called Tango, and then a Stephen King miniseries called Storm of the Century. So it's going to be a interesting couple of weeks for that. But I pass it off to all of you. What have you all been watching lately? Let us know in the comments. Love to read what you have to say. Well, Jacob, let's get into some Punisher stuff. This is season 1, episode 5, called Gunner. Frank and Micro go looking for answers from a reluctant witness. Madani and Sam learn of a looming investigation. Rollins sees a ghost. So we were speaking off air before we went and started recording this. We're already kind of starting to feel the burn a little bit because like this series is really just struggling to find a point. I think that's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah, this has been a really rough watch so far. When I was starting to watch this episode, I totally forgot that Madani was almost killed in the last episode and Frank Castle saved her. I had to be reminded of that in the first 5 seconds when they were recapping. I'm like, oh yeah, that happened, didn't it? that just shows you like how uneventful these first 5 episodes have been.
Yeah, it's sad state of affairs when a flashback be like, oh yeah, that happened in literally the last episode of the show that I'm watching. So it's like it just like a splash of cold water. You'd be like, oh yeah, yeah, that happened.
Yeah. Now I will say, I think this one had a better pace to it than some of the previous episodes. I think they were in focus for the most part. I like that we're back to Frank Castle investigating. Now, as far as what he's investigating, the momentum's not there, but at least it's back to him. I like the exchange with him and Karen Page in this episode. There's great acting from both actors of him trying he still is on the path of vengeance, and Karen is horrified by that. She wants to pursue like the more legal path, taking a page out of Matt Murdock and Foggy. But yeah, Punisher wants to go his own way, of course, because he's on his own pretty much. I think even the subplot with Madani, I think that's starting to come into a little bit of swing in this episode. And I like that we got a moment with her and Karen Page. I thought that was a pretty good sequence. I like the action scene in the forest was pretty cool. I like the brutality of it. It reminded me a little bit of Rambo First Blood. I liked the practicality of that. There was this one kill that Frank Castle does where he gets his weapon out of the ground, it comes up in the guy's gut, and I was like, "Oh yeah!" Like John Rambo would totally do that. I'm like, this is the kind of action I was looking for in a show like this. But I still don't really care about the main story, the conspiracy going on, some of the villains that have been set up. It's still kind of a meandering show. And even though there's some good elements, there's still a lot where I'm like, I don't really care about the meat of what's going on. And that's like the biggest thing that's hurt the show so far.
Yeah, that's the big problem. I just don't care. And you just hit the nail on the head right there. It feels like it feels like Frank Castle is being more used as like helping out Micro's son rather than doing of anything substantive. It just like and you want to like have him like have a surrogate son, that's fine, but make it interesting. That is my problem here.
Yeah. I'm just thankful that this episode we didn't focus on the PTSD soldier guy, but I know that's going to come probably in the next episode.
Yeah, that's gonna come roaring back in the next, if not the next episode, then the one after. But I pass it off to all of you. What did you think of the episode? Let us know in the comments. But Jacob, let's get into the main event. This is, according to the Saturday Evening Post, the worst movie musicals ever. And this is from August of 2020, but looking over the list briefly, it looks like, well, the list will not disappoint. But I'm ready to go if you are.
Yeah, let's look into it.
All right, so starting off the list at number 10 is Xanadu from 1980. Perhaps the biggest problem for Xanadu's detractors is that its disparate elements just never really hang together. Gene Kelly brings in a classic vibe, and the attempt to blend the 40s and the 80s is commendable. But seeing Kelly frequently just reminds you how much better old Gene Kelly movies were. So, I don't hate Xanadu. I've seen it. I think it's most assuredly a product of its time, especially in like the songs, but Olivia Newton-John is trying, Gene Kelly is trying, but I mean the worst, I disagree with it being the worst, but there are definitely ones that are like worse than this, I feel. But what do you think, Jacob?
Yeah, I have seen Xanadu one time. To me, the movie didn't fully work for me, which is sad because you got Gene Kelly, and if I'm not mistaken, this was like his last big movie. You got Olivia Newton-John, and you got a great soundtrack by Electric Light Orchestra. That's one of my favorite bands.
Mine too. Mine
the
too.
The music in this film is great. Olivia Newton-John has some good songs. Olivia Newton-John, I just said that. Electric Light Orchestra has some fantastic songs, some of which are very underrated. But I don't think all the elements fully gel together. The story doesn't really work with these. I think they're like these. I think they're supposed to be goddesses that are from this mural that come out every few decades or so or whatever. It's just, I don't know. The story did not work for me. And apparently, Olivia Newton John, decades past, flirted with the younger version of Gene Kelly, and now she's back to deal with him again. I'm like, this is so weird. I'm not getting into this at all. But the soundtrack is really good, and I wouldn't say it's one of the all time worst musicals because the soundtrack is really good, but the story just does not work for me, and it's definitely one that misses the mark.
This movie definitively feels like it's too weird to live and too rare to die.
Mm-hmm.
But moving on to number nine, it's Cats from 2019. And honestly, I feel like putting it at just nine is rather generous. But but
when
Jacob, do
when
we
when
even really need to talk about it?
when you sent me the link to this, I knew Cats was going to be on this list. This movie is a stinker, man.
It's it's terrible. And this article was written in August of 2020. Cats didn't come out until came out in December of 19. So like it literally DOA, dead on arrival.
uh, no, I got a good story to share with you on Cats. I saw this crap in the theater. Like I
I did
went to a dollar theater and saw this movie because as soon as I saw the trailer, I was like, this is one of those movies, that needed to be seen to be believed. So I'm like, I'm gonna go to the dollar theater, see this movie, because I had a feeling this was gonna be one of those hilariosity films, those movies that Chris Stuckman used to review on his channel. And I was ready for this. And I pretty much got the movie I expected. This movie is bad from the special effects to the weird nonsensical storytelling that makes absolutely no sense. It's so incoherent. You got this, I think it's this cult of cats or whatever that come together, and once a year they pick a cat to go up to send up into the sky or whatever. Are they sending these cats to die? I'm like, I am so confused. I don't know what they're doing with this story.
That's certainly what they're implying.
I'm like, what? And then some of the actors they got in this movie, they got like Rebel Wilson, James Corden, Judy Dench, Ian McKellen. Some of these choices are so weird. Jennifer Hudson's trying to do like the Anne Hathaway "I Dreamed a Dream" moment where she gets this big emotional song, and yeah, we all know "Memory." On its own, it's a great song. But then when she's singing it and you got the bad CGI that looks like mucus is coming out of her nose, I'm like, I cannot take this scene seriously. It does not work.
Bless Jennifer Hudson for trying, but just man, this was neither the time nor the place to try and put any effort.
And let's not forget the ending of this movie. The ending. Do you know what happens at the end of this movie? So Judy Dench cat literally puts her face up onto the screen like this, and she's like singing the fourth wall, and she's like singing how proper it is to address a cat. And the ultimate way to address a cat is a cat is not a dog.
You know, you know, my Michael Caine, when people would ask him about Jaws the Revenge, he'd be like, I haven't seen it, but I've seen the house it bought me. I imagine that like Judy Dench, if she wasn't so proper, would have something like, I haven't seen Cats, but I've seen the car it bought me.
and
I
then
would imagine.
and then Taylor Swift is in the movie for 5 minutes. 5 minutes. To be fair, she has the best song of the movie. but she's only in the movie for 5 minutes.
She arrived, she did her thing, and she left. Honestly, it was the most honest thing in the whole movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, Cats is awful. Don't watch it. And I'm honestly shocked it's only at 9. But number 8 is Can't Stop the Music. It is described as the fictionalized origin story of the Village People, starring the Village People. It was
Oh,
also the other half of a double feature with Xanadu that
oh
inspired
wow.
that inspired John J.B. Wilson to create the Golden Raspberry Awards. Can't Stop the Music was the first winner for Worst Picture. Plot-wise, the movie is a disjointed mess as it tries to follow multiple plot lines, like a romance between Valerie Perrine and then Bruce Jenner, Jenner's film debut roughly 25 years before coming out as trans and taking the name Caitlin. The struggles of Steve Guttenberg's songwriter, the recruitment of the Six Village People, and more. The only well-known VP song in the film is YMCA. It appears during a musical number set at the, of course, Y, and features full frontal male nudity, something that generally never happens in a film not rated R. Bonus track, the director was Nancy Walker, best known as Rhoda's mother from the Mary Tyler Moore Show, and Rhoda, and character Rosie for 20 years of Bounty paper towel commercials. So yeah, you seen this one, Jacob?
No, I've not seen this one. I heard the only reason I had heard about this movie was I saw it was the first ever Razzie winner, but I didn't know much about it. I didn't realize this was a Village People movie.
Yeah, their
Just from
origins apparently.
just from the way it's described, it sounds like one of those like you have to see it to believe it type movies.
For sure, for sure. But at number 7, it is Grease 2. Producer Alan Carr was a successful producer of films like Grease, a Tony and People's Choice Award winner, and an agent that discovered talents like Mark Hamill, Michelle Pfeiffer, and Olivia Newton-John. He also produced Can't Stop the Music, Grease 2, and that career-killing Snow White Rob Lowe Oscar number. So win some, lose some? You can hardly blame anyone for wanting to follow the insanely successful Grease with a sequel. On the other hand, the original film had the bedrock of the stage musical to build on, and on the other hand, it's just bad. The lone bright spot is Pfeiffer, who had the distinction of being one of the few elements that wasn't savaged by critics. Male lead Maxwell Caulfield went on to a different kind of musical immortality as Rex Manning in Empire Records. So, Jacob, have you seen Grease 2? Because I have not.
I have not seen Grease 2 either. Obviously, the first film was a classic. I had no real interest to see Grease 2 because of the probably the negative reception it had. But yeah, if I do check it out, yeah, I'd probably check it out because I think it launched Michelle Pfeiffer's career, which is pretty interesting. And she actually has a solid singing voice. She did her own singing. She sung in The Prince of Egypt, and it was pretty good.
Yeah, so I mean, Michelle Pfeiffer would go on to do great things, so obviously you got to start somewhere, right? But at number 6 is The Pirate Movie from 1982. It's the 1980s, so that must mean it's time for dueling Gilbert and Sullivan adaptations. One uses the original name of the stage musical, The Pirates of Penzance, and the other opts for simply The Pirate Movie. One has Kevin Kline, Linda Ronstadt, and Angela Lansbury, and the other stars the guy from The Blue Lagoon. Oh no. One failed because of a bad business decision, and the other failed because, well, it's the pirate movie. The film starts badly by shoehorning in a let's start in modern day and make it a dream sort of premise, and goes more wrong from there. 1983's Penzance with Ronstadt was cut off at the knees because Universal tried to simultaneously release it in theaters and pay services. Subsequently, many theater chains boycotted it, destroying its box office chances. So this sounds like it kind of did the whole thing during COVID where it was released in theaters and on streaming the same day. But it sounds like the latter strategy was far more successful. But I have not seen this one, never even heard of it, Jacob. What about you?
Yeah, I've not. heard of this either, so I don't really have much to say on it. But I can't imagine those movies being worse than Cats, though.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if we see it, then we agree, but I don't know. That's a little odd. But at number five, and I've seen clips of this one, and I think sounds a little harsh, but maybe you've seen this one and maybe you can tell me. But Rock of Ages from 2012 is at number
Mm,
five.
I've seen Rock of Ages. I can see why it would be on a list like this, but again, I don't think it's worse than Cats. Uh, it's got a good idea for a premise. It's the soundtrack is based on 80s rock. It's like a jukebox musical where different characters are singing already established songs from the 1980s and placing it in their own narrative. And I thought in that front it's pretty cool. There's some interesting choice of actors to play these characters because you got the lead character is an aspiring singer played by Julianne Hough from Dancing with the Stars fame. She's a good singer, but I don't buy her as a rocker. So I think that takes me out of it right there. You have other choices that's kind of weird too. Like you got Alec Baldwin and Russell Brand are in this movie, and they play these two like different characters. And there's this one part where they secretly have a crush on each other. And the song they use to do that is Can't Fight This Feeling by REO Speedwagon. And let's just say it was done in such a cringe way that I will never think of that song the same way again. And then the most interesting casting choice is Tom Cruise, who plays like the hardcore, living on the edge, stereotypical rocker who's like into the sex and drugs and stuff like that. And actually, it's not hard to be shocked by this, but Tom Cruise gave the best performance this movie. And his singing is not half bad. Like he does Pour Some Sugar on Me, the Def Leppard song. He actually did a good job on that. So I think the movie had good ideas, but the execution wasn't really all there, and half the cast don't really sing that well. Surprisingly, the one who stands out is Tom Cruise.
In a good way, right?
I would say Tom Cruise gave the best performance.
Interesting. But number four is the movie Nine from 2009. And no, I'm not talking about the Peter Jackson produced one with the little like sack puppets. Like, not the number nine, just nine.
Number nine.
Nine is the rare case of a movie that gets a ton of award nominations, four Oscar nods, but ultimately no one seems happy about it. The creative pedigree is astounding, based on Arthur Capet and Maury Yeaston's stage musical, which was itself inspired by Federico Fellini's Eight and a Half. It is directed by Rob Marshall. It stars Daniel Day-Lewis, Penelope Cruz, Marion Cotillard, Judi Dench, Sophia Loren, Nicole Kidman, Kate Hudson, and Fergie. So, yeah, there's a lot of people in this. So it
Yeah,
must be really bad to end up on a list like this.
yeah, yeah. I remember seeing this film advertised when it came out, but it was one of those that came and went. I've never seen it. I know the director, Rob Marshall's made some pretty good movies. I'm not the biggest fan of Chicago, but I know that was a big movie for him and it won Best Picture. But he's directed some other movies I do like. He directed Mary Poppins Returns, and he also directed Into the Woods. He has his track record's kind of up and down though, especially since he recently directed Disney's not so good remake of The Little Mermaid. But based on a cast like this, I can't imagine it being worse than The Little Mermaid disaster or, well, as we've already mentioned, Cats. So, based on the cast, I wonder if Fergie was the one who train wrecked this movie.
Yeah, maybe, but let's move on now to number three, From Justin to Kelly. The Golden Raspberry Awards went in hard on this one, calling it the worst musical of our first 25 years. Kelly Clarkson won the inaugural season of American Idol on Fox. Justin Guarini was runner-up. They found themselves contractually obligated to do a movie for Fox, and this utterly terrible spring break musical was the result. Sure, we understand that they called Kelly's character Kelly, but her movie last name of Taylor means that she inexplicably and distractingly shares a name with Kelly Taylor of Fox's 90210 franchise. Much of the plot is a series of contrivances to keep the leads apart, which makes little sense. It's really not good. Clarkson has of course had 28 Hot 100 hits since, and Guarini has stealthily appeared for years as Lil Sweet in an ongoing series of Dr. Pepper commercials. So, Jacob, you threw your head back in disgust when I read the title, and I've never heard of this movie, so you must know of this one? Question
I
mark.
have seen this movie
Oh, you
one
have.
time.
How many times?
I did a collab on I don't forget if it was on my channel or Mike's channel. Did you see that?
I was
We
gonna say,
collabed
did
on this
Jacob
movie
Collins
together.
put you up to this?
No, Jake. No, this was before. I think this was before I even met Jacob Collins. But this movie, see, Cats is bad, but I would say Cats you can watch and get some unironic enjoyment out of it because of how bad it is. From Justin to Kelly, it's just plain bad. Uh, yeah, just Justin Guarini is talented. Kelly Clarkson is talented, but they are no actors. They cannot carry a movie, and they have no on-screen chemistry together. I don't think any of the songs work. The story is generic and unoriginal. It's very ill-conceived from the get-go. I'm glad this movie. Well, I normally don't like to say I'm glad a movie did so bad, but I'm glad that this was not a thing that they did in all the other American Idol seasons. Because can you imagine Carrie Underwood doing a movie after she won, or can you imagine Taylor Hicks doing one, or that one season that had the two Davids on there, David Cook and David Archuleta as the final two. How is that going to work as a movie? I don't know.
No, no, it sounds rough, but needless to say, Justin Guarini would go on to do good things. I did when it said Lil Sweet, I'm like, oh yeah, I've seen those commercials. So
He's
good.
a sweet one.
Yeah, that's him. And then he's gotten some voiceover work, so good for him. And Kelly Clarkson, I mean, good Lord, we all know who she is. Like Breakaway, What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Stronger, Already Gone, which is my personal favorite song of hers. So yeah, so like she would go on to do great things. So this is just a blip on the radar for these two, thankfully.
Mm-hmm.
But at number two is Shock Treatment from 1981. How do you follow the success of the Rocky Horror Picture Show? Apparently, you can't. It had the original director, Jim Sharman, the original writers, Sharman and Richard O'Brien, the original songwriter, O'Brien, two of the original characters, Brad and Janet, though played by different actors, and several members of the original cast as new characters, but it just doesn't connect. While the idea of a whole town inside a studio dominated by constantly running TV programming is ahead of its time, it never totally comes off, and you just constantly wonder as why viewer O'Brien and Patricia Quinn aren't just their fantastic riff-raff and magenta selves again. Jessica Harper, who replaced Susan Sarandon as Janet, had the female lead in another frequently panned musical, Phantom of the Paradise. However, she was also the lead in the horror classic Suspiria and appeared in its 2018 remake. So, yeah, I've never even heard of Shock Treatment. Heard of Rocky Horror Picture Show. From what I've heard, it's very good.
I've seen Rocky Horror Picture Show. It's one of the most bonkers musicals I've ever seen. But, it's not a personal favorite of mine, but it does have a great soundtrack, and Tim Curry steals the show in the role of Frankenfurter. Uh,
As he often did.
yeah, Tim Curry's the best thing about about that movie. The only reason I had heard of Shock Treatment is because there's a channel that I've regularly watched over the years called Minty Comedic Arts, which looks at like 10 things that you may not know about certain movies. And he did one on Rocky Horror Picture Show one time. And one of the things that he brought up was the fact that they made a sequel called Shock Treatment, which flopped. And just hearing about that movie, I'm like, yeah, I can see why with it having a different cast. Tim Curry's not back. I could just see that being a disaster waiting to happen.
I mean, you can only do that magic once. You can never replicate it.
No, the time warp can only be done one time in 1974.
Pretty much, yeah. But coming in at number one is a movie called The Apple from 1980. Apparently, 1980 wasn't exactly the best year to try a musical. There's three on here. Can't Stop the Music, Xanadu, and this one. Director Menahem Golan co-owned the Cannon Group. Oh no. They
What's
made
the
some
canon?
cheesy but popular films like Breakin', American Ninja, and Missing in Action. They were also responsible for disasters like Superman 4: The Quest for Peace and the 1990 version of Captain America that never made it to American theaters. The Apple somehow tries to combine a future version of the Eurovision Song Contest, here the 1994 World Vision Song Festival, and a parable of the dangers of the entertainment industry with, wait for it, the Bible. You have analogs for Adam and Eve and the devil, Mr. Boogaloo, who owns a label, of course. You have variations on temptation scenes, title song The Apple, which includes a sort of tour of hell with dumb as anything lyrics. It's natural, natural, natural desire, meet an actual vampire. The climax of the film is the rapture. Seriously, this is a real movie. Utterly Crazy doesn't even really cover it, but sadly, it's not an eminently rewatchable kind of crazy. It's just terrible. So, Jacob, you're going to preacher school. You showing this in any of your classes?
I've I've never heard of this for one thing. This one sounds bonkers. It reminds me of that time when I think a few years ago there was this live production that I think Tyler Perry produced where they tried to do like the story of Jesus in modern day, like literally 21st century. And it was like a live show that was on live TV. And I watched probably about 30 minutes of it. And I'm like, what are we doing here? You're missing the point of the Bible with this. And this just sounds like something in a similar wheelhouse.
You know, I remember one like last year we covered crazy Easter specials. This list didn't get to that point, but like reading the Apple, I'm like, well, you can add another one to that list. Sorta, kinda.
Oh, I'll tell you one I was surprised that didn't make the top 10. This is another one. It's not really a musical per se, but it involves singing in it. Have you ever heard of the movie Rhinestone?
That has Stallone in it, right?
That's the one that has Stallone, who gets caught, who's part of this bet that Dolly Parton's character is doing. It's kind of like a reverse My Fair Lady. Dolly Parton makes a bet that she can take anybody and make a country star out of them. And so she ends up picking a cab driver played by Sylvester Stallone, a New York cab driver. It's so bad, it's hilarious hearing Sylvester Stallone try to sing country music of all things and singing with Dolly Parton.
I can just imagine.
Yeah, it's so bad.
Apparently, according to the Saturday Evening Post, there are worse musicals than Rhinestone.
Yeah. Well, they must have overlooked the lyrics to one of Stallone's songs. There's one song where he literally sings, "Budweiser, you've created a monster, and they call me Drinkenstein."
Wow. But I pass it off to all of you. What's the worst movie musical you have ever seen? Comment below, let us know. But Jacob, that was a fun look at some awful movies that I probably won't be seeing anytime soon. But nice to run them by you. Nice to have a good laugh at their expense. But your channel, as always, is linked in the description. Tell the people where they can find you.
You can also find me on Letterboxd, Twitter, and Facebook. You can also Of course, subscribe to my YouTube channel. As far as videos coming on my channel this week, uh, I have a celebrating Disney review up for The Little Mermaid Ariel's Beginning. I don't have any big live streams on the channel this week, but I have some more live streams coming. I think probably next week. I think next week I know I'm gonna be doing the group review of CCR's album Bayou Country. That's going to be coming. But there'll be more info probably on that probably when we do our episode next week.
Like I said, Jacob's channel is linked in the description. Go give him a subscribe. As for this channel, the Road to Godzilla X Kong continues apace. As of this recording, the review for Godzilla vs. Megalon is now live. Also going live today is the review for Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, and then Saturday will be Terror of Mechagodzilla, and then that will be the end of the Showa era of Godzilla. A very up and down era, to say the least. And then starting off next week will be my review for the 1976 version of King Kong, directed by John Gillerman. And I am glad to have Epictastic Joshua making his channel debut to help me talk about that. And then, of course, 1999 Project every Friday, Small Talk Podcast every Wednesday, or every Tuesday, excuse me, and every Wednesday, Life in the Movies with Jacob Martin. And next week, will be the February 2024 previews, so that will be live streamed. So stay tuned for the stream at that time. But for Jacob Martin, my name is Ryan Cam. We will see you in the next one. Y'all take care.